once we get the idea of computing plastic, this is sort of an irrelevant image. It's just having your pillow be a display screen, and then you see whatever you want to see on your pillow. You kind of now, I wrote 4 books in the Ware series. There was software, then wetware. So software, people start building intelligent robots, and then the robots come down to Earth to harvest some human minds by eating brains. And then in wetware, the robots figure out how to do wetware engineering and build human copies of themselves. And then in freeware, the aliens show up in the form of cosmic rays, which when they become decrypted, and you'll have some piece of computational plastic, and then suddenly you get some freeware in it, which is an alien personality. And then realware goes on. Anyway, those 4 books are out as a tetralogy, and you can actually get this for free. It's also up as Creative Commons. A publisher was annoyed with me that I did this, but actually, it's one of those things. You only get one life, so you can never tell. It seems like actually the sales are better. It's because I was giving it away also. So you can either buy it or get it for free. Now, another big concern of mine is telepathy. So I'm just going to mention a few things in passing here that I'm obsessed with. And one of the mysterious things about language is that I can stand here and make this series of sort of grunts and tweets, and you get sort of an image of what's going on inside my head. And that we can talk at all really is telepathy. That we can have cell phones is telepathy. It's amazing that we can pass thoughts from each other. But we'd like to kick it up a notch, and that's the dream of having some more high-level kind of telepathy. And that's something I've often written about in my novels, doing it with quantum mechanics or with radio transmission of some kind. And instead of just getting a copy of somebody's thoughts, you can actually maybe go, it's like a web link, you can go and access it from their minds. And I did a drawing of this. There's a man and a woman here, and they're in telepathic contacts. I drew a thought balloon where you have images of them, like a yin-yang. Then I did a painting of this. And it's a little bit easier maybe to see there what's going on. So, see, that's his head and her head are linked there, this yin-yang thing. I actually have a show. I started painting it about 20 years ago because I got tired of just doing the digital typing thing. And so there's a show of my paintings in the Mission on Valencia Street. There's a bookstore called Borderlands that I'm sure many of you know about it. It's a premier science fiction bookstore cafe. So you can see these paintings up until March if you're curious. Biotech is a big thing. We used to talk about nanotechnology, and really, I think at one point there's this idea of there being little tiny gears, like a trillionth of a meter across, and that's not the way you're going to make things that are really small. I mean, Mother Nature is already doing nanotech. The true nanotech is biotech. Okay, so it's getting tiny, getting the molecules to do what you want. You're not going to make them do it by trying to put them on a assembly line with a belt. You're going to get them to do molecule things. And that's biotech. Now, I think it's probably safe to think that in 100 or at least in 500 years for sure, we won't be using machines pretty much at all anymore. Everything we'll be doing will be things that we grow. And like the houses that we live in, you'll get this seed like the size of a pizza, and you'll push it into the ground and water it really a lot, and then you'll get a house. And it'll be this sort of pumpkin sort of thing, and it'll have the bathroom will just be this sort of little pod in the wall. It'll have water for you. It'll pick up any radio. It'll have some wires that it extracts from the soil. It'll extract metal from the soil and give you internet access, so you're still using that kind of thing. the house tree. And then, obviously, we'll want to have wings. Okay? So that's kind of a fanciful picture. Even things like knives. You might say, if there's no machines, how can you get a knife? Well, you can have a knife plant. I mean, why does that keep you hard? You know, there's a lot of iron ore in the soil. You can grow it, then you cut it off and you get it. And I wrote a couple of novels about a future where everything's biotech. One was Fracking the Elixir that was set in the year 3003. I published that, I think, in 2002, right around there. And then my most recent book, The Big Aha, is also set in a biotech world. I really see that as something that's going to happen. This is a painting I did, sort of imagine a scene in Fracking the Elixir. Not sure how well this shows up in here, but I wonder if we could kill this light here. Maybe not. This is a sort of city where we've got buildings that are these huge organic grown plants. One idea, I like to push things further. Earlier today somebody was saying, well, how can people keep writing science fiction because now the future has already happened? Well, I mean, the future of the 40s has already happened. But you just have to keep going there. It's like science fiction is never going to be easy. I mean, they're thinking, well, we've thought about all the things that are cliches and that I've always known about, you know, robots and spaceships. But the hard things in science fiction, sort of exciting things, if you're a professional science fiction writer, what you spend your time doing is trying to, you know, go out there. You know, it's like you're a surfer. I'm out in the surf every day. I've been out there metaphorically. Been out there for 40 years, you know, every day, trying to go further out, looking for the bigger waves. And they're out there, but you have to make an effort. And one thing that you do is, well, you just look at the things around you, and you extrapolate and say, well, how can I push this? We have this tendency as humans to sort of take for granted the way things are. I think things are always like this. You know, things aren't going to change. Things always will be like this. But things weren't like this, and they're not going to be like this in 5 more years. Everything is going to keep changing. Another sort of kind of opposite side of that coin is people aren't going to change. I mean, we're exactly the same kind of people that lived in the Middle Ages. If you look closely, I'm a big fan of the paintings of Peter Bruegel. And you look at the crowd scenes, you look at the people, you look at their faces, what they're acting like. They're really the same as the people you see now. We're never going to be these impossibly good people in Star Trek pajamas, you know. It's not going to happen. We're going to be sleazy, you know. We're going to be greedy. We're going to be lustful, you know. And that's okay. That's human nature. It's there's no reason to get too ascetic and say we're going to cast aside our bodies and be these pure flickering flames. You know, we're going to be funky people, and that's not going to change. That's Oh, the reason I got into this thing now, though, I wanted to talk about some of the non-future ideas. And one idea I like is a notion I've pushed a little bit. I wrote 2 novels called Post-Singular and Hylozoic. And that's a notion that hasn't been pushed very hard in science fiction. The idea that everything in the world is alive. What do I mean by that? Well, suppose I take that literally. There actually is a philosophical doctrine called hylozoism, not so well known as it could be. And it's the idea that even a pencil is alive, a rock is alive. And then you say, well, what does that mean? It's not crawling around, it's not eating, it's not breathing. In what sense is a rock alive? Well, I've thought of one way to think about it is, let's jump up here, is the idea that if we think of everything being quantum mechanical, the thing is, here's the scene, but underneath the scene is what we're actually made of is a quantum mechanical wave function. So there's this continuous wave function underlying the world with this information pattern. And even a rock has that nature. Okay? Even the rock has Buddha nature. Even the rock rock. The rock is actually a quadrillion balls connected by vibrating springs. And it's like jelly, it's shaking all the time. You can do all the computation you want. So that's this notion that I went with in Hylozoic. That book, the first book, it was a duology. I didn't want to push it into a trilogy because I was scared they weren't going to sell well and I wouldn't be able to sell the third one. So what I did on the last page of Hylozoic, I had somebody get into this rap and they just told the whole story of what would have happened in the third one. But Post-Singular actually did fairly well. That's a novel that's set in San Francisco, and it's sort of these punk rock type of people. And one reason I picked that title, Post-Singular, was this was the time Ray Kurzweil was popularizing the word singularity, which is Bernard Vinci had first coined some years before. And I was like, well, look, I'm a science fiction writer, we should own the word singularity. You know, why are these engineers taking it and saying it's their word? Singularity Institute. He's making money off of it, and I'm not. And I'm doing it. So I said, let's imagine getting past it. So then I said, I'll write a book called Post-Singular. So then that made me happy to do that. There's a period when science fiction writers were a little afraid of the singularity. They said, well, how can we write about that? You know, it's not robots and spaceships, you know, it's something different. And then there's a writer called Charles Stross, who I greatly admire. He's younger than me. I don't think you should call him a younger writer anymore. But he wrote a book called Accelerando. And in there, he just went for it and just took it through all the stages of the singularity. You know, the world building, the robots, as smart as us. There's a great thing in Accelerando where they're sending a crew of people, you know, to some place like Alpha Centauri, but it takes so long. What they've done is encode the people's personalities inside a piece of machinery the size of a Pepsi-Cola can. And so they feel like they're in there, and it's being pushed by some giant megawatt laser. Anyway, but Post-Singular. And then in Hylozoic, that's when I said, okay, now I'm gonna do the novel I always wanted to write, where all the objects are alive and we can talk to them. And that's sort of fun. Anyway, so I can do that if everything is quantum. Now, my real goal that I wanted to talk about today is cosmic consciousness. That's, you know, well, it's sort of like being high, but, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be that you're high, you know, but you're in contact. And so now I'm going to get sort of didactic on your ass and I'm going to put a few words up here. So I have this friend called Nick Herbert, who, he's a very cool guy. You can find this talk online, by the way, and you can click on that link there if you wanted to be involved. Anyway, Nick says, okay, so this is the big aha. This is kind of the key aspect in my new novel, the big aha. So I'm going to talk about this for about 10 more minutes, and then we can go out and eat. So, in quantum mechanics, there's these two processes. There's what they call Schrodinger's wave equation, or the universal wave function, and there's this smooth kind of thing, this undulating wave thing that's just evolving in a deterministic, smooth way. And then there's the other thing, is when you go and measure something, instead of being in this smooth, undulating wave of, you know, probabilities and so on, suddenly, bam, you know, it's either yes or no, it's alive or dead, it's 0 or 1, and it's sort of discontinuous and seemingly sort of random. And so there's these two processes posited by quantum mechanics, the sort of smooth process when you're not really bothering things, like you're in the restaurant, you haven't decided what to order, you're just spaced out, you're mellow, and then the waitress is leaning over you, what do you want? And you're like, oh God, I have to decide, you know, and so then suddenly you had this smooth anticipation of a meal, and then suddenly you have to collapse your quantum wave function. Before you know it, you're calling something really horrible, you know, and you're stuck with that choice. So, you can find this process in your mind. There's this feeling, if you look into your consciousness, what's going on, there's this sort of smooth, mellow mode that you can be in. And then there's this thing of deciding something really precise and specific. Now, I think of these two modes as the cosmic mode and the robotic mode. Now, I would argue, and I think if you pay attention to what's going on in your mind, you might come to agree with this, that you oscillate between these two ways of thinking. And it's something that we do, I don't know, maybe a couple of times per second. And I think of it as being a little bit like radar. You sort of, you blend out, you smooth in your cosmic, it's all cool. Then you draw back and say, wait, what time is it? Where do I have to go? Are they looking at me? Where am I going to get some money? And then you oscillate. So you merge, you snap back, you merge, you snap back. And that's a natural process of perception. You space out. And if you couldn't space out, then you wouldn't be able to really understand anything. You sort of merge in and you enter into the reality around you and you become part of it, and then you get an understanding of it. And then you snap back and you put words on things, you put names on things. So you need both those processes, the cosmic robotic. And so you're doing this constant oscillation. Now, naturally, though, so there's the cosmic mode. The guy's merged into the universe. And so again, so there's the cosmic mode, there's the robotic mode, there's the shimmering center of possibility, there's the specific thoughts, there's the universal wave function, there's the collapse, the unobserved, the nameless, okay, and then there's the measured and nailed down. So there's these two modes, and here's a guy in cosmic consciousness. And the idea in my novel would be, people figure out a way to jam the switch to cosmic. Now, they do it using, well, the thing if you're a science fiction writer, you always need some gimmick. I call it a Volgosity generator. A Volgosity generator to make, the things that you want to have happen. So in the big aha, they have something called quantum wetware. So we've got the double buzzword. It's quantum and wetware. Wetware is another way of talking about, the organism or the state, the biotech of your own body. So they use quantum wetware, and they find a way to jam open their switch so they can stay in the cosmic mode. And that's good because it's like they're tripping, sort of, but without false drugs. They're just in the state of being high. Now, something that happens then is they also develop telepathy. Because if you're merged into the cosmic universal wave function, it's easy enough to believe that, your thoughts and my thoughts can be mixed together. Now, there's an interesting point about this. One of the ideas in science fiction, too, is to keep in mind the limitations imposed by actual physics. And one limitation is, one problem with telepathy is if you have action over a distance, then it seems like you can get faster than light communication. And you could say, well, suppose I want to say that you can't do that. Suppose I want to hang in there and keep relativity theory and say we can't have faster than light communication. Well, Nick Herbert, this great sage of Boulder Creek, he's this sort of hermit, weird guy. I like to go visit him every now and then. And then he says, well, you can have telepathy as long as you don't remember what you said to the other person during the telepathic session. And I think that's a nice way to write about telepathy, actually. It's sort of like when you have, with your lover, you have some loving conversation, you just merge together, and then afterwards, well, what did we say? You don't really even remember specifically. It's like a dream. You don't remember the details. You remember the feeling, but you don't necessarily remember the details. So that's the gimmick that I use for telepathy in this book. Now, it's a nice picture. It's another eyes watching you. Now, one of the things in the big aha, you might say, what is the title about? Well, there's this hope you have your whole life. You're a seeker. And I think many of you, if you come to a conference like this, you're sort of looking for some answer. And you feel like, well, I'd like to find the ultimate answer, the big aha, the big zap. I want the final answer. And when I was younger, I had some hopes of finding the big aha. And now I've come to think of it in a sort of different way. It's sort of the old, it's like the Zen bait and switch trick, You say, I'm going to teach you the big aha, and then you go there and you meditate and you study and you think. And then they say, well, that's the secret. You're like, what's the secret? The secret is that you're alive, you're in this world, you're in the present now moment. That's all there was, that's all there is. That's the big aha. And that's, if you can wrap your mind around that, that can be it's sort of nice. You can see the big aha. You focus on something, you're in the present, you say, wow, this is, that's an incandescent light. Pretty soon we're going to go outside and we're going to see the sunset. That's going to be good too. Now, so wait, what's the big aha? There's nothing complicated about it. All you have to do is pay attention. Or not. That's the Zen thing. It actually doesn't matter if you pay attention. Because the big aha comes just the same. It's everywhere. So, I think you've had a long day here, and now I've shown you the secret of life, so maybe I'll stop there and have a few questions if anyone has. Thanks. How does all this relate to higher dimensions, like in my stories? The sex practices. How does this relate to the sex practices of people from Venus? Well, maybe I can talk about it over later. I do like to put sex in my novels. People like sex. And it's fun to think about. Cheers, people. Another question. Yes?
Played out in actual science.
Right.
So when you listen to scientists talk about the research, how does that impact your fiction?
Okay, so the question is, science often seems to be playing out ideas that were in science fiction, and now when I listen to scientists, how does that help me with writing stories? Well, it does help a lot. There's different levels of ways you can get things from science. I've been a devout reader of Scientific American for many years, so somehow it seems less startling than it used to. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I'm older, I don't know. But, so I do look for science things that I can play off of. It doesn't actually even have to be science things, just things that you see people doing, people using cell phones or drones. Of course, I've been writing with drones for a long time now. One thing you can certainly get from scientists is buzzwords. There's always screaming on buzzwords, because you need the buzzwords for your velocity generators. To some extent, science fiction is a little bit like fairy tales. We pretend that it's about science, but really we're writing about flying carpets and magic cloaks, and demons and angels. These archetypal things that sort of speak to the deeper longings in your nature. And then fantasy writers and science fiction writers, sometimes they're doing the same sorts of things, but we dress up what we're doing in different ways. And in fantasy, the difference is, in fantasy the explanations don't have to make sense at all. And in science fiction we like to have that there's more of a logical kind of this pseudoscience apparatus that we build up to have sort of a unified explanation of it. So, but I do get a lot from science, and you never know what's going to sort of zap you. If I just look on Twitter, sometimes I'll see something that's very useful. Yeah?
In one of your earlier books, Saucer Wisdom,
Yes.
as I remember, you kind of summed up a number of themes and ideas from the previous novels, and it was in kind of a fictional context as well.
Yeah, Saucer Wisdom is one of my stranger books. It was marketed as a non-fiction book of speculations of the future. It came out right around the millennium. But it was actually, if you look at it a little more carefully, it's a novel. And the setting of the novel is supposedly, one of the characters is called Rudy Rucker. And so Phil Dick used to do that kind of thing. So I was riffing off that. And then he has a friend who was supposedly abducted by UFOs many times, and the UFOs took him to the future, and then he saw what they're doing in the future, and he came back and told Rudy Rucker what he saw, and then that's how this book came to be written. And actually, Wired Books was going to pay for this. Wired Magazine was starting a books division, and they didn't know the book market very well. They didn't know how little money they could pay me. So, they gave me like $50,000 to write this book. And the thing is, the way I closed the deal, I went to the pitch meeting, and I brought with me a friend of mine he was my roommate in college, and he had hair down to his shoulders and a full beard. And he basically looked like a homeless person that you'd see, at the meeting asking for money. And so I said, well, this is my friend Frank Shook, and he's the guy who got abducted by the UFO office. And all the stories in this book are true, because Frank told me everything that's happened to him and he wrote it down. And then my friend, he sits there about 5 minutes and says, I can't take it, I've got to get out of here. He's actually a complete psycho and leaves. And they're like, oh, we really want to do this book. But then at that point, reality caught up with the Wired Book division, and they folded. And my agent worked out on them, so they had to pay me anyway. But actually, that book did finally come out, Saucer Wisdom. And the reviewers, they couldn't quite figure out if I was making fun of them or what. So it didn't do that well. I hope to republish it at some point this year. Yeah?
You mentioned quite frequently with this discussion about how using actual living structures. Do you believe that a more biological future for humanity might be more beneficial than, let's say, artificial components?
Oh, yeah. So the question is, would it be nicer to live in a biotech world than in a mechanized world? And it would seem so. I mean, there's this natural, pleasant vibe to living things. On the other hand, I mean, viruses are living things, and, stinging jellyfish are living things. So, I mean, there are living things that it's not so great to have them around. So, but I think in principle, I mean, the whole image, it's not a reason that we think of the machine age as being soulless and sort of crocheting. If we can be reasonable about it. And sometimes there's a fear of biotech, this idea that we might tweak the wrong gene, and then suddenly you have some horrible sludge that eats the whole world. But the thing is, that's actually very unlikely. And the reason being that every organism out there in nature has been trying to take over the whole world for millions of years. It's like there's this alley that we're going into, and we made some little toy that we're going to put in there. We're going to think, oh, that's going to kill everybody in the alley. Mother Nature is a bitch. So I don't think we'd be too scared to break it.